Marcus had spent 15 years paying for that pool. 15 years of mortgage payments, property taxes, and chlorine bills. The rectangular oasis sat in the center of his 3/4-acre lot like a crown jewel, custom tiling, an infinity edge overlooking the neighbor's cornfield. A stone deck that cost more than most people's cars. He'd earned it. Every penny. He'd also earned his privacy. But privacy was becoming a luxury he couldn't afford. It started 3 months ago when the walking trail was cut through the neighborhood. The town council had decided that a public footpath connecting Riverside Drive to the old highway would improve community connectivity. What they meant was bisect private property, destroy quiet mornings, and turn residential streets into thoroughfares. Marcus had voted against it. So had 17 other homeowners. They'd lost 9-3. The path ran along the back of his property, separated from his pool area by a weathered wooden fence that was suddenly, in the eyes of every pedestrian within a 5-mile radius, an invitation rather than a barrier. "Hey, is that a pool back there?" a teenager had asked, peering through a gap in the boards the first week. By week 2, they were coming in groups. Families on weekend walks, kids on their bikes, teenagers looking for somewhere to cool off. The fence became less of a boundary and more of a suggestion. Last Saturday, Marcus had found 6 people in his pool. 6. He'd been inside making lunch when he heard the splashing. His first thought was that someone had broken in. His second thought, when he saw them through the kitchen window, a couple he'd never met, their 2 kids and a set of twins from down the street, was something darker. Something that made his chest tighten. "Excuse me!" he'd shouted, walking out onto the deck. "This is a private pool. You need to leave, now." The woman, blonde, maybe 40, had looked at him with genuine confusion. "We're just using it. No one's here. No one's here because it's my house, and it's my pool. Please get out!" The man had climbed out first, dripping and indignant. "It's just water, man. We're not hurting anything." "It's just water on my property that I paid for," Marcus had replied, his voice steady but his hands trembling slightly. "Get out." They'd left, but not before the woman made a comment to her kids about some people being territorial, and when you have something nice, you have to share it. That comment had stuck in Marcus's chest like a splinter. On Sunday morning, he'd found 8 people in the pool. By Wednesday, the traffic was constant. People would hop the fence or slip through the gate Marcus kept locked, but apparently not locked enough. They came during lunch breaks. They came after work. On Thursday evening, Marcus had actually seen a mother setting up a beach umbrella on his deck while her children did cannonballs off the diving board. He'd called the police twice. Both times, the officers had been sympathetic but ultimately powerless. "It's technically trespassing," one had said, "but unless they become aggressive or you file a formal complaint and serve them papers, there's not much we can do." And with the public trail running through there, it's a gray area. A gray area. His own property was a gray area. Marcus had tried talking to his neighbors. Maybe they could organize, hire a lawyer, something, but most of them seemed indifferent or even amused by the situation. One had laughed. "Free entertainment, right? The neighborhood pool." By Friday morning, Marcus had made a decision. If they wanted to treat his pool like a public amenity, he'd give them one. He'd spent the weekend building. The ticket booth took 2 days. Marcus wasn't a carpenter by trade. He was an engineer. Detail's his thing, but he'd measured twice, cut once, and constructed a small wooden structure that looked exactly like what it was, a professional ticket booth. Clean lines, a small window, a sign that read, "Admission, $50 per person." He'd installed it on Monday morning, right at the gate to the pool area. The lifeguard chair came next. He'd ordered it online, a serious one, red and white aluminum, regulation height, and set it up Tuesday afternoon. Then he'd bought a whistle, a real one, the kind lifeguards used. He'd even created a laminated sign with rules. No running. No diving, no glass containers. Lifeguard on duty during posted hours, 8 a.m., 6 p.m. Liability waivers must be signed upon entry. Wednesday morning, he printed the first day's signs and posted them on the gate. By 9 a.m., the first person had arrived. It was the same teenage boy who'd first peeked through the fence. He stopped short when he saw the booth, the chair, the signs. He read everything slowly, his expression shifting from confusion to something like respect. $50, he called out. $50, Marcus confirmed from the lifeguard chair, where he sat in sunglasses and swimming trunks, the whistle around his neck. That's the rate. Cash or Venmo? You're serious? Completely. Serious. The boy laughed, actually laughed, and walked away. But he came back, 40 minutes later with 4 other teenagers and $50. Cash. Marcus had almost fallen off the lifeguard chair when the kid handed him the money. You're really doing this, the teenager said, grinning. This is insane. Can I post this on TikTok? Absolutely not, Marcus said, then reconsidered. Actually, sure. Go ahead. By lunchtime, there was a line. Word had spread through the neighborhood with terrifying speed. The internet had done its thing. By Thursday, local news was calling, asking for comment. By Friday, there was a line of 20 people around the block waiting to get into Marcus's pool. Some came out of curiosity. Some came out of a sense of ironic appreciation for what they saw as a brilliant middle finger to the system. Some came because they genuinely wanted to use the pool and were okay with paying for the privilege. And then, on Friday afternoon, the blonde woman showed up. This is ridiculous, she said, not to Marcus, but to the crowd forming behind her. Her face was flushed, her voice pitched high. He's trying to shame us out of using a resource that should belong to the community. Marcus watched her from his lifeguard chair. My son asked me why we had to pay to swim in our own neighborhood. Do you know how that made me feel? She turned to Marcus directly now. You have this beautiful pool, and instead of being generous, you're charging people? What kind of person does that? Marcus set down his phone. He stepped down from the lifeguard chair and walked to the fence, his shadow falling across the woman's face. The kind of person, he said quietly, who paid for it himself. But you live here. We all deserve... You deserve what you pay for, Marcus interrupted. Just like I do. I earned this pool. You didn't. And if you want to use it, you pay, just like everyone else. The woman's face went red. This is extortion. This is capitalism, Marcus replied. This is what happens when people forget the difference between public and private. She stood there, vibrating with indignation, while the crowd watched in complete silence. Then she pulled out her phone. I'm calling a lawyer, she snapped. This is discrimination. This is... Have a nice day, Marcus said, turning back to his chair. He climbed back up and sat down, his heart pounding, his hands shaking slightly. He picked up his whistle and blew it, not at anyone in particular, just a sharp, loud blast that echoed across the deck. The crowd stirred. Several people moved toward the gate with their payment. Behind them, the blonde woman stood frozen, her phone to her ear, her eyes burning into Marcus's back. Marcus didn't turn around. He adjusted his sunglasses and watched the water shimmer in the afternoon heat. He had no idea what was coming next. Marcus was sitting at his kitchen table, coffee in hand, scrolling through the comments on the viral TikTok, which had somehow accumulated 4.2 million views, when the doorbell rang. He almost didn't answer it. The past few days had been a blur of deliveries, more supplies, fan mail, actual fan mail, and what he assumed were hate packages that he'd left unopened on the porch. The process server was a thin man in a polo shirt who looked deeply uncomfortable about the entire situation. Marcus Webb, the man asked, extending an envelope. Marcus took it without a word. The letter was from Morrison and Associates, LLC, representing one Rebecca Paulson, the blonde woman. The charges were a novel combination: discrimination, unlawful commercial enterprise on residential property, creating a public nuisance, and something called deliberate emotional distress to minors through denial of recreational access. The last one made Marcus laugh out loud. He actually laughed so hard he had to sit down. Then he called his insurance company. Then he called a lawyer of his own. Then he did what any reasonable person would do in his situation. He checked his bank account. The pool had made $3,147 in 4 days. By Tuesday afternoon, when the news vans showed up, That number had jumped to $8,200. The story had caught fire in a way that transcended the usual viral moment. It had become a thing, a perfect encapsulation of some larger cultural argument people had been having for years. Entitlement versus property rights, community versus individualism, the boundaries of kindness versus the boundaries of law. There were think pieces. There were TikToks defending Marcus and TikToks condemning him. There were Reddit threads analyzing every word of his interactions. Someone had created a change.org petition. It had 200,000 signatures already, titled, "Support Marcus Webb's Right to His Private Property." But there were other petitions, too. Ones calling for him to be forced to share. Ones questioning his humanity. One particularly creative one suggested that hoarding pools in a time of climate crisis should be illegal. The local news station wanted an interview. So did 3 national outlets. A podcast had already recorded a 2-hour special about him. Someone had made a documentary trailer, which was absurd because nothing had actually happened yet. And then, on Wednesday morning, Rebecca Paulson held a press conference in her driveway, which was, unfortunately for her, right across the street from Marcus's house. He watched from his bedroom window as she stood in front of a small crowd of reporters, her teenage son beside her, looking genuinely distressed. "My children have every right to use the recreational resources in this neighborhood," Rebecca was saying, her voice trembling slightly. "We're not talking about trespassing or criminal activity. We're talking about basic human decency. And when someone responds to a community need with greed and cruelty," she paused, letting her voice crack slightly, "it says something about our society." Marcus felt his stomach twist. This was different. This was no longer abstract. There was a real kid standing next to her, and that kid looked genuinely embarrassed to be there, which somehow made it worse. His phone buzzed. It was his lawyer, David Chin. "Don't respond," David's text read. "Don't post. Don't engage. I'm calling you." 2 minutes later, David was on the phone, his voice calm but urgent. "The lawsuit is moving faster than expected. Paulson's lawyer is aggressive. They're filing for an emergency injunction to stop you from charging admission." "The hearing is Friday. Can they do that?" Marcus asked. "Maybe. The law is genuinely unclear here. You're on private property, but there's an argument that you're creating a public accommodation by advertising the service. If it goes to court, it could go either way." Marcus felt something cold settle in his chest. "What do you recommend?" "Stop charging. Close the pool. Let this blow over." "No," Marcus said immediately. "Think about it," David urged. "The legal fees alone are going to cost you 10 grand minimum. You've made less than that. It's not about the money. Then what is it about?" David asked, and there was genuine confusion in his voice. Marcus didn't have a good answer. He'd thought he did, but standing in his bedroom, watching Rebecca Paulson give her performance on the street below, he realized he wasn't entirely sure anymore. "It's about principle," he finally said. "Principles are expensive," David replied. "Think about it and call me back." Thursday brought another development, support. A local business owner named Gerald Hoffman showed up at the pool around noon. He was in his 60s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "I own 3 restaurants," Gerald said, standing on the deck while Marcus ran the Lifeguard Chair operation. "I also own a lot of private property." "What you're doing?" "It matters. More than you know." "I'm just protecting my property rights," Marcus said. "You're doing more than that," Gerald replied. "You're saying no. Do you know how rare that is? Everyone's always apologizing, always trying to make everyone happy. You're saying no, and you're not even sorry about it." Gerald pressed a business card into Marcus's hand. "If you need anything, legal support, media support, anything, call me." That afternoon, 3 other people showed up and said similar things. A woman named Linda, who ran a bed and breakfast, spoke about having strangers show up unannounced. A retired teacher named Frank discussed how his property had become a dumping ground for the neighborhood's unwanted items. An older man simply said, "It's nice to see someone fight back." By Thursday evening, Marcus had a dozen local business owners offering support. One had even offered to fund the legal defense, but something had shifted in him. He sat on the edge of the pool that night, his feet in the water he'd paid for, maintained, heated, and he felt the weight of it all pressing down. He'd gone from feeling righteous to feeling something more complicated. He'd become a symbol. And symbols, he was learning, had responsibilities whether you asked for them or not. Friday morning arrived cold and gray. The courthouse was a brick building from the 1970s, all hard lines and institutional harshness. Marcus sat next to David at a wooden table, watching Rebecca Paulson and her lawyer, a sharp-looking woman named Patricia Morrison, take their seats across the room. The judge, a woman in her 50s with steel-gray hair and reading glasses on a chain, entered without ceremony. She listened to both sides with an expression that revealed nothing. Patricia Morrison presented her case first. She argued that Marcus was creating a public accommodation, that he was discriminating based on economic status, that he was exploiting a community resource. She showed photos of the ticket booth, the lifeguard chair, the signs. She played the viral TikTok. Then David stood up. He was good. He talked about property rights, about the distinction between public and private, about precedent. He talked about Marcus's right to do what he wanted with his own property. He presented the lease agreement for the public trail, which very specifically stated that it did not extend to private residences. But the judge kept asking one question, over and over in different forms. Why? Why had Marcus done this? Why hadn't he simply put up a better fence? Why charge admission instead of asking people to leave? Why take something from his community? And David, to his credit, kept giving her the same answer. Because it's his right too. The judge nodded thoughtfully at that. Then she stood up, and everyone went quiet. "This is an interesting case," she said, "because it sits right at the intersection of two things we hold dear: property rights and community." The plaintiff makes some valid arguments about the intent and impact of the defendant's actions. The defendant makes equally valid arguments about his fundamental right to control his own property. She paused, looking directly at Marcus. "However," she continued, "I'm denying the emergency injunction. Mr. Webb is operating a legitimate business on his own property, and he's not preventing the plaintiff or anyone else from using the public trail. If the plaintiff wishes to continue this case on the merits, she's welcome to do so. But the injunction is denied." Marcus felt David's hand on his shoulder, squeezing once. Then the judge said something else, something quieter. "Though I will note, for the record, that just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should." The gavel came down. That evening, Marcus stood alone on his deck, watching the sun set over the water. The pool was closed for the day. No lifeguard chair, no ticket booth, just water and stone and sky. His phone had been ringing all afternoon. Interview requests had quadrupled. His lawyer was talking about potential book deals. Gerald Hoffman had sent a text asking if Marcus wanted to partner on a business venture. But Marcus wasn't thinking about any of that. He was thinking about Rebecca Paulson's son, standing in that press conference, looking like he wished he were anywhere else. He was thinking about the judge's words. Just because you can do something doesn't always mean you should. He was thinking about the moment, 3 months ago, when the first person had looked at his fence and seen not a boundary, but an invitation. And he was wondering for the first time if maybe she had a point. His phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "You won, but you didn't win anything that matters." Marcus stared at the message for a long moment. Then he blocked the number and sat down in one of his pool chairs. The water was still, perfect, and entirely his. But as he sat there in the gathering darkness, Marcus realized something that no legal victory could see. He'd been having the dream again. The one where the pool was overflowing, water spilling across the deck, seeping into the house, flooding room after room while he stood frozen, unable to stop it. He lay in the darkness for 20 minutes, listening to his own breathing, before giving up on sleep. He went downstairs and made coffee. Then he did something he'd been avoiding. He read the comments. The internet had moved on to some other scandal, but the ones from his supporters remained, crystalline and permanent. There were thousands of them. People calling him a hero. People saying he'd owned the entitled masses. People using his story as a battering ram in their own arguments about property and rights and the death of personal responsibility. One comment, Liked 50,000 times, read, "Finally someone who won't be bullied by the woke mob. Marcus Webb is what a real man looks like." Another, "If only everyone had his spine. The world wouldn't be so soft." Marcus scrolled through them, and with each one he felt something shifting inside him. These weren't just comments anymore. They were expectations. They were an identity being constructed around him, a version of Marcus Webb that bore less and less resemblance to who he actually was. He'd never wanted to be anyone's symbol. The second thing that happened came around 9 a.m. when David called. "We need to talk about strategy," David said without preamble. Paulson's lawyer filed an amended complaint. "They're alleging that your actions constitute deliberate infliction of emotional distress, and they're asking for damages." "How much?" "They're asking for 50,000. Marcus set down his coffee. "For what?" "I charged admission to use my pool. For creating what they're characterizing as a hostile environment that specifically targeted Rebecca Paulson and her minor children," David said. "They've got a child psychologist lined up to testify that the public humiliation caused her son emotional trauma." "That's insane." "It's litigation," David said flatly. "Look, the good news is that we can probably get this dismissed before it goes to trial, but it's going to cost you." "How much?" 15 to 20 grand minimum." The number hung in the air between them. "I need time to think," Marcus said. "Think fast," David replied. "They're moving aggressively." The third thing happened that afternoon, and it was worse than either of the first two. The message came through his Instagram, which had somehow accumulated 340,000 followers without him posting anything, from someone named Justice for Rebecca. It was a photo of his house. Not just any photo, one taken from the street. With his address clearly visible in the frame, the house number zoomed in and highlighted. The caption read, "If property rights matter so much, maybe his property should be protected by all of us equally." There were 8,000 likes. Marcus stared at it for a long moment, then screenshotted it and sent it to David with a single message. "Is this a threat?" David called back within minutes. "Don't respond. I'm calling the police." By evening, there were 3 similar posts. One had been taken down, but the other 2 remained. Marcus tried to report them to Instagram, but the company's response was bureaucratic and unhelpful. "We've reviewed the content and determined it doesn't violate our community guidelines." The posts weren't technically threats. They were just invitations, suggestions, a nudge toward a particular course of action. Marcus called the police non-emergency line himself. The officer who took his report was sympathetic but not optimistic. "Without an explicit threat, there's not much we can do. But file a report. Document everything. If anything actually happens, we'll have a paper trail." What actually happened came on Sunday morning. Marcus was in the shower when he heard glass break. He was dressed and down the stairs in 30 seconds. The damage was in the living room. A rock, approximately grapefruit-sized, had come through the front window. Attached to it with a rubber band was a note. His hands were shaking as he picked it up. "Entitlement kills community," the note read in printed letters. "We're watching." Marcus called the police. He called David. He called his insurance company. He did all the things a person is supposed to do when someone throws a rock through their window. But what he didn't do was post about it online or tell anyone except the people whose job it was to know. The police filed a report. They suggested he install a security system. They suggested he might want to consider his options regarding the pool situation, which Marcus correctly interpreted as maybe just close it down and go away. David was more direct. "This is escalating. You need to think about what you're willing to risk for this." "My own home isn't supposed to be a risk," Marcus said. "Welcome to being famous," David replied quietly. "Your home is whatever people decide it is now." That night, Marcus stood on his deck, looking at his pool. It had been 3 weeks since he'd installed the ticket booth. He'd made just under 15 grand total. He'd spent more than that on legal fees already. The lawsuit was far from over. He had a broken window. He had strangers photographing his house. He had supporters who were starting to scare him as much as his detractors. And he had made Rebecca Paulson's son a symbol of entitlement in the eyes of thousands, of people who'd never met him. That was the thing that kept coming back to him. The image he couldn't shake. The kid's face during the press conference. The embarrassment. The helplessness. Marcus had done that. He'd created that moment by choosing to draw a line in the sand and dare people to cross it. He'd won the legal battle. But David's words kept echoing. The higher the walls you built to protect what was yours, the smaller the space inside them became. The pool reflected the moonlight. Perfect and pristine and utterly alone. His phone buzzed. It was Gerald Hoffman, the businessman who'd supported him. Saw what happened with your window. Terrible. But this is exactly why we need to stand firm. Can't let the mob dictate terms. Marcus didn't respond. He sat down on the edge of the pool and stared at the water for a long time. Then he made a decision. Monday morning, he called David first. I want to settle, Marcus said. You're in a strong legal position, David argued. We can beat this. I don't want to beat it, Marcus said. I want it to stop. There was a long silence on the other end. How much? David finally asked. Whatever it takes. The settlement was announced on Tuesday afternoon through a joint press release. Marcus Webb and Rebecca Paulson had reached an agreement. Marcus would close his pool to public admission. The ticket booth would be removed. The lifeguard chair would come down. In exchange, Rebecca agreed to drop the lawsuit. There was no mention of damages, which meant, the news outlets correctly deduced, that Marcus was paying her something. They speculated wildly. Was it $10,000? $20? $50? It was $35,000. The reaction was immediate and vicious. His supporters felt betrayed. He'd caved to the mob. He'd given in to the entitled. He was a coward. He was soft. He'd let them win. The TikToks multiplied, the think pieces updated, the Reddit threads erupted in outrage. His critics called it justice. Finally, the system had worked. Finally, someone had been held accountable. But Marcus noticed something else. Beneath the noise, beneath the arguments about who had won and who had lost, there was a kind of exhaustion. People were tired of arguing about his pool. The story had run its course. By Wednesday, there was a new scandal to argue about. Marcus spent Thursday removing the booth and the chair. It took him most of the day. The booth came apart piece by piece. He recycled the wood. The lifeguard chair he dismantled with a reciprocating saw, cutting it into manageable chunks for the trash. The whistle he kept. He stood on his deck that evening, the whistle in his hand, and looked at the pool. It was just a pool again. Expensive and well-maintained, but just a pool. The thing that had seemed so contested, so profound, so worth fighting for, it had been reduced back to its essential nature by the simple act of stopping. His phone rang. It was his sister Jennifer calling from Seattle. "How are you doing?" she asked. It was such a simple question, and it broke something in him. "I don't know," Marcus said. "I won, I lost. I paid $35,000 to not have a conversation with my neighbors anymore." "That's not what happened," Jennifer said. "What do you mean?" "You paid $35,000 to remember that you're a human being," she said gently. Not a symbol. Not a position in someone else's argument. Just a person who lives in a house and owns a pool. Marcus didn't say anything. "I was watching the news," Jennifer continued, "and I saw people arguing about whether you were selfish or principled. And I realized that neither of those things matters because you're just my brother. You're someone who got put in an impossible situation and did what you thought was right. And then you changed your mind. And that's okay, is it?" Marcus asked. "Yeah," Jennifer said. "It is. That's the part everyone forgets. You're allowed to change your mind. You're allowed to be wrong. You're allowed to just live your life." After they hung up, Marcus sat with that thought for a long time. The pool was closed now. The chaos had stopped. The comments still existed online, but they were fossilized, permanent but powerless. Somewhere in the neighborhood, Rebecca Paulson was probably thinking about what to do with $35,000. Her son was probably relieved that his mother had stopped being the subject of national debate, and Marcus was alone on his deck, holding a whist. Marcus found himself doing things he hadn't done in months. He cleaned the pool filter himself instead of calling the service. He replaced some cracked tiles on the deck. He pruned the hedges along the property line, the ones that faced the street, the ones people could see. He was preparing, though he couldn't quite articulate for what. David called on Wednesday. "I want to make sure you're doing this for the right reasons," he said carefully. "What are the right reasons?" Marcus asked. "That's what I'm asking you." Marcus thought about it. "I'm not sure I know anymore. A week ago, I thought the right reasons were about principle and property rights. Now I think they might be about something else entirely." "Which is?" "Learning how to live next to people," Marcus said. "Learning that you can have boundaries without having to advertise them constantly." David was quiet for a moment. "That's good. That's actually really good. But Marcus, I need you to understand something. Once you open that gate, once you let people in, even just one family, you've changed the narrative. The people who supported you are going to feel like you betrayed them. The people who opposed you are going to feel vindicated. And neither of those things is necessarily true." "I know," Marcus said. "Do you? Because you're about to become a different symbol to different people. You're about to be the guy who saw the light or the guy who caved. You don't get to control which one." "I think I'm okay with that," Marcus said, and he realized as he said it that it was true. Thursday evening brought an unexpected visitor. Marcus was in his backyard, adjusting the umbrella near the pool chairs, when he heard someone call his name from the street. He looked up to find a woman standing at the gate, not inside it, but at the threshold, respecting the boundary. It was Linda, the bed and breakfast owner who'd shown up at his pool weeks ago, offering support. "Hi," she said, and there was something awkward in her smile. I heard things were changing, and I wanted to talk to you." Marcus opened the gate wider. "Come in." They sat by the pool, and Linda didn't waste time. "I was wrong," she said. "When I supported you. I still think you had a right to do what you did, but I was using your situation to justify my own anger. At my neighbors, at the world. And I realized that when I heard you were settling." "How did you realize that?" Marcus asked. "Because I wanted to be angry at you for settling," Linda said honestly. "And when I wanted that so badly, I realized that I'd never actually been on your side. I'd just been on the side of anger. And I don't want to be on that side anymore." They sat in silence for a while. "I told my neighbors I was sorry," Linda continued. "The ones whose RVs I'd complained about. The ones I'd made feel unwelcome. I didn't open my property or change anything, but I did try to be kinder. It's been weird, but good." "That's good," Marcus said. "I also wanted to warn you," Linda added. "Some of the people who were really invested in your thing, they're not happy. Gerald Hoffman, the businessman, he's been telling people you're weak, that you caved to political correctness. He was hoping to use your victory to push some ordinances through the city council about property rights." "What kind of ordinances?" Marcus asked. "The kind that would make it harder for the city to do pretty much anything," Linda said. "Restrict public easements. Limit liability waivers. Make it easier for people to sue if the city tries to do any kind of community project on properties near theirs." Marcus felt his stomach tighten. "I didn't know that." "Of course you didn't," Linda said. "Because Gerald never told you. He was just using you." After Linda left, Marcus sat alone by the pool for hours, thinking about the ways people had tried to use his situation. The people who wanted him to be a hero, the people who wanted him to be a villain, the people who wanted him to be a symbol for their causes, their arguments, their wars. And he realized that none of them had ever actually wanted to know him. Friday morning, Marcus did something he hadn't done in weeks. He checked his social media. The comments on the settlement announcement had evolved. Some people were still angry, but most had moved on. There were a few supportive comments, mostly from people who understood nuance, who got that the world was more complicated than a pool could contain. But there was one comment that caught his attention. It was from Rebecca Paulson's account, and it had been posted 3 days ago during the height of the vitriol. "To everyone attacking Marcus Webb, he's a person. To everyone defending him, he's also a person. What happened was complicated. What comes next doesn't have to be." Marcus sat with that for a long time. Then he did something that made his hands shake slightly. He replied to her comment. "You're right. Thank you for understanding that." He watched the notification appear almost immediately. Rebecca had liked his response. Saturday arrived gray and cool, the kind of day where the sky can't decide if it wants to rain or not. Marcus spent the morning cleaning the pool again, even though it was already clean. He arranged the chairs in a casual semicircle. He made sure the water temperature was perfect. He stocked the cooler with sodas and water and ice. When the doorbell rang at 2 p.m., his heart was beating faster than it should have been. Rebecca stood on his porch with Daniel, who was taller than Marcus expected, and had the particular awkwardness of a young teenager in a social situation he didn't fully understand. Rebecca had brought a bag of chips and a frozen pizza. "I thought we might need sustenance," she said, holding up the pizza. "If you don't mind." "Mind? I have no idea what I'm doing," Marcus said, which made Daniel smile, a real smile, not a social smile, and somehow that made the whole thing feel less terrifying. They made the pizza together, and by the time it came out of the oven, Daniel had actually started to relax. He asked Marcus about the pool, how deep it was, if the diving board was regulation height, whether Marcus ever did cannonballs. "Not in a while," Marcus admitted. "I got too busy protecting it to actually enjoy it." Daniel considered this with the seriousness of someone who didn't yet understand how profound that statement was. After they ate, Rebecca and Daniel got in the pool. Marcus watched from his lifeguard chair. He'd kept it, just hadn't ever filled it, as Daniel practiced cannonballs with the unself-conscious joy of a kid who was simply allowed to be a kid. Rebecca floated on her back, peaceful in a way she hadn't seemed in any of the photos from the conflict. It was such a simple thing. Boring even, unremarkable. Exactly the kind of ordinary afternoon that Marcus had been fighting so hard to prevent. "You should get in," Rebecca called out. "I don't want to interrupt," Marcus said. "You're not interrupting," Rebecca replied. "You're sharing." So Marcus got in the pool. He swam a few laps while Rebecca and Daniel goofed around on the diving board. Daniel asked if Marcus could do a backflip, and when Marcus said no, Daniel spent 20 minutes trying to teach him, which ended with both of them laughing so hard they could barely breathe. By the time Rebecca and Daniel left, around 6 p.m., when the light was starting to turn golden, something fundamental had shifted. Marcus didn't feel like he'd solved anything. The internet still had recordings of all of it. The people who'd been angry were still angry somewhere, probably. The people who'd been on his side were probably confused or disappointed by his change of heart. But none of that mattered anymore, because Daniel had done a successful cannonball, and Rebecca had laughed at a joke Marcus made. And for a few hours, the pool had been what it was supposed to be, just a place where people could cool off on a summer afternoon. Sunday brought a development that Marcus didn't anticipate. The local news ran a story. Neighbor dispute turns to connection. How one man's change of heart is healing a divided community. It was a surprisingly nuanced piece. The reporter, a woman named Sarah Chin, had interviewed both Marcus and Rebecca. She'd also interviewed Linda and Frank, the other neighbors who'd been affected by the original conflict. What emerged from the story was a picture of something that Marcus hadn't been looking for: reconciliation. Marcus Webb didn't have to apologize, Sarah said in her closing statement. He won his legal battle, but he chose to recognize that winning and being right are different things. And that choice, it turns out, has been contagious. The story showed Linda and her neighbors having coffee together. It showed Frank organizing a block party for the following weekend. It showed the neighborhood slowly starting to talk to itself again after months of argument, and it showed Marcus, standing by his pool, looking more peaceful than he had since this entire thing began. What the story didn't show was the comment section that erupted afterward. There were still people calling Marcus a traitor. There were still people calling him a hero. But there was something else, too. People sharing their own stories about conflicts they'd had with neighbors, property disputes they'd fought, walls they'd built. And some of them were saying they were going to try a different approach. One comment in particular stuck with Marcus. "I've been at war with my neighbor for 3 years over a property line. We haven't spoken in all that time. After watching this story, I'm going to go say hello. I don't know if we'll ever be friends, but I'm tired of being enemies." That comment had 127,000 likes. Over the next 2 weeks, Something unexpected happened. People didn't start treating Marcus's pool like a public amenity, but the